last we left, we were talking about value, and just to kind of bring you guys up to speed, value we define as being the emotional and intellectual relationship between a person and an object or option. Someone suggested you could also put in here the spiritual kind of relationship, thinking that there's something beyond emotions and intellect. There's gut level feelings, hunches, that sort of stuff. But I figure because it's still happening in your brain, I'll just leave it as this because, you know, I'm not changing this slide. I've used it for 30 years. So, oh, there you go. So we were talking about value being the emotional and intellectual relationship between a person and object. And then we said, well, over the course of documented time, people have come to label value in different sorts of categories. And a lot of them seem to come up with 4 categories. So this is not unique to me. This is yet again a merging of brilliance kind of an activity where we go like, what other models are there of human values? And are they using kind of like 4 general buckets? But survival value, economic value, moral value, and aesthetic value seem to be what they were. Life, gain, goodness, and beauty. If you go back to the 20s and 30s in Bohemian France, the ones we talk about in the early stages of the nature of change are safe, secure, happy, and healthy. So those are the different categories of value. We talked extensively about that. And we end up saying like, well, ultimately that people are not resistant to change. They're resistant to losing control. But because control equals value and value equals control, they're just so interrelated. You could also say they're resistant to losing values or doing something that runs against their values. Now, if it's running against their values, I'm sure we could draw a direct connection to the fact that because their value is being we're failing to meet their value, or it's not aligned with their values, that does translate into some sort of a loss of control. So, but anyway, my point is you could be talking about value just as easily as control here, and the same thing would hold true. Thoughts about that? So we favor things that resonate with our values, and we tend to avoid things that don't resonate with our values.
Yeah.
Yep. So now, if you were a regular audience, I would be breaking this lecture up into umpteen little opportunities for the audience to have conversation with one another. And I would always give the audience a certain subject to discuss with their partners, or, you know, whatever, tabletop, however they want to divvy themselves up, make it interesting. So I'd say, I just want to know, in what ways are the people you want to influence out of control? That's the big question we always have to be asking ourselves. So in our role as human development professionals, the people we want to influence are our clients. And if we want to be of greatest value to them, we have to figure out, where do they feel like they're out of control? Can I predict that? If I'm in a coaching session with them already, I could just be pulling it out of them. I could say, so in what ways do you think you're going to lose control? What's happening? What is it that you feel like you're up against? Or, you know, look at the 4 quadrants we did for the 4 aspects of control and say, what's happening in the bottom half of it? So things you don't want to gain and things you don't want to lose. So what's happening down there that makes the upper parts of things less attractive or more complicated to get, whatever you have to be looking at. Yeah, so anyway, we talked about that for a while. You guys have any, you want to share about anything? Who are you trying to influence? In what way are they out of control? That's what it's all about.
I've been dealing with somebody whose drinking is out of control.
Oh, all right. And because they're drinking
is talk about this in public, I thought.
Yeah. So now, to take it a step further, if their drinking is out of control, then we're going to assume that their behavior is also out of control.
Yes.
Now, the drinking in and of itself, someone wants to drink, fine, drink. However, it's affecting your behavior.
It's rarely done in private.
Yeah. And that's where it becomes really, you know, a problematic kind of way. And that's interesting that you talk about something like someone with an alcohol problem, because the next section of the nature of change is trying to explain why things aren't happening automatically. So let's just rewind a little bit. We said that one thing that every one of our clients has in common is they want something to change. So I don't care if that's a corporate client we've worked with or an individual client, it doesn't matter. The only reason why they turn to a human development professional or to a family member or a friend or a coworker, colleague, whatever, they turn to them because there is something that they would like to be different than the way it is right now. That's just a definition of the word change if you want to look it up. So people come to us because they want something to be different. Well, we can then do all the work that we've talked about. And again, because this is the oracle of the self, you apply this to yourself and it works out just, just as well. The reason why you start thinking about, the reason why you start considering changes is because you start to just be thinking about your life, or something happens and you go, that's not the way I want it to be. That's not helping me be safe, secure, happy, and healthy. Oh, I need to make some sort of a change. And so even within yourself, this concept is going to hold very, very true. So the moment we then say to you, well, we can help you get back in control. We can meet all of your values. We can give you the strategies, the whatever, the tools, the techniques, the whatever, to enable you to do that. So you'll get the control you want and you won't have to suffer through the out of control sort of stuff. Does that guarantee that they're going to do what needs to be done? Is that all there is to the process of change? And what do we know? The answer is
No.
no. So you have to ask, why is it then that humans, supposedly intelligent creatures, know that a change needs to occur and see full benefit in doing it and no downside to doing it? Why do they still not follow through and do what needs to be done? Well, in order to answer that, we're going to go back to a different entry point to the way we talk about the nature of change. So the nature of change is subject matter for someone to deliver in a keynote talk or a training program or whatever. There's two different points, actually three different points of entry, but inside the nature of change there too. The first one is the one we've done. Are people by nature resistant to change? And we have the audience member, the individual, kind of explore their mindset around, that question. And you guys already know where it ends up because it ends up to where we are right now. Well, the other thing that we could do, and what we did originally, was we would talk about the march toward extinction. And so let me go into my mode and see if I still remember my spiel from so many years ago. So I would say to my audience, in the June 1989 edition of National Geographic appeared an article entitled Marching Toward Extinction. In this article, they published and discussed findings of researchers studying the fossil record. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the fossil record, all over the planet, there are areas where the Earth's crust has become exposed, and you can see layer after layer after layer after layer. You all know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And then I'd say, well, they call that the fossil record because it's all these different kind of layers of stuff that accumulated over a long, long, long period of time and ended up compressing itself enough to become rock. Nevertheless, there are distinct layers that we can look at. And the scientists are able to perform some sort of a test that establishes the age of each one of those layers. And then by examining the things that can be found in that layer, whether it's fossil remains or whether it's traces of chemicals and or things being too much salt concentration or whatever, they can pretty much tell you what they think was happening on the planet during that particular thing. So that's the fossil record. And then by looking at all these different fossils, and it's not just fossils remaining of animals, it's also like minerals that got compressed together. I don't know that they would call that a fossil because I don't think anything really changed, but nevertheless, that's the stuff they're also looking at. And
That's how they found how people traveled the United States way back when, because they found mercury.
They would find objects. They would find all kinds of things that had no business being there otherwise.
Well, they were taking it medicinally, so they knew where their genes were.
Yeah, they were. And then you wonder where all the madness came from.
Right.
It's mercury poisoning. So anyway, so here I am, back in my mode, and I'm just saying now, in order for a species to, so I said among the most, okay, gotta go back in my mode. Among their most fascinating findings was one very interesting statistic. Of all the species that have ever lived on this planet, every living thing, bacteria, whatever, of all the living things that have ever inhabited planet Earth, 99.9% of them are now extinct. And their fossil remains are here to prove it, quite literally etched in stone. And so now, let's say, in order for a species to become extinct, one of two things has to have happened. Those are cataclysmic events or dysfunction. So cataclysmic events are things that happen when, you know, you're just going about your basic day and suddenly a meteor comes crashing out of space, slams into the planet and sets up a whole chain of events that ultimately equaled the demise of the dinosaurs and, you know, everything else that was going on at that particular point in time. So cataclysmic events are things that are sudden, unforeseen, and unexpected. We have no ability to control them. We have no ability, more often than not, to predict them. If we get an early warning, consider yourself very, very lucky. These are things that are going to be very dramatic and very tragic. And that accounts for a very large percentage, but not the majority of the species that have lived and died on planet Earth. Thoughts about cataclysmic events? Or you guys see where I'm going with this? Yeah.
I see where you're going.
Yep. Or the other thing that could happen is that for some reason, the species stopped paying attention to what was changing in the world around them, stopped adapting, and little by little found themselves very poorly equipped to survive in a hostile and changing environment. And so it may very well be that certain climate changes, and whether they were profound climate changes or whether they were just subtle little climate changes that were happening as Earth was becoming Earth as we know today. Remember, I'm probably going all the way back to when the continents were closer together. There were still things living on the Earth long before humans evolved. Or landed, as I believe the real case is, but nevertheless, I'm the one who's writing a fiction novel. So anyway, cataclysmic events and dysfunction. They stopped paying attention, didn't adapt, and slowly but surely find themselves locked into a statistically assured demise. Now, while we can talk about the fossil record and everything that's lived on this planet, this process also happens inside each and every one of us. So if we are going to become extinct, our day will come. Is that day going to come because of some cataclysmic event, some sudden, unforeseen, expected thing? Not the magnitude of a tsunami or an asteroid flying out of Earth. I think that a heart attack. I don't know. I think that the medical community, you know, Brian on the call, would say that no, most heart disease, that's about dysfunction. That's not about a cataclysmic event. So maybe cataclysmic events are more things like car accidents, things like that. So, or dysfunction. We as individuals stop paying attention to the changes that are taking place in the world around us. We stop adapting, and little by little, we set ourselves up for a statistically assured demise.
That
So,
sounds about right,
yeah.
actually, when I think about it. When I think about what we call normal today, in terms of like the stress and these needs for devices, and you're always just distracted. You said this back in, you said 1989?
This is 1989. I actually own an autographed copy of that issue where the authors of that article, because I talked about it so much, one of my colleagues reached out to the authors and had them actually autograph that for me.
And see, interestingly, in 1999, Peter Drucker, you know, who's known as the father of management,
Absolutely. Yeah.
he wrote Managing Oneself. And I remember the quote in that book where he said, like, in a few hundred years, when the history of our time is written, the long-term perspective is not likely that historians will see technology, internet, e-commerce as a thing that really drives our attention. He called it the unprecedented change in the human condition. He said that back in 1999.
Yep.
He was talking about how there's so much change in these knowledge workers. You're going to have to strategize a working life over a 50-year span, and you have to understand yourself. And I think we've moved so far away from that. So I don't know.
No, I think you're absolutely right. So, you know, many things have been written about dysfunction, and that, in fact, that's what we're getting into, you know, in the next little thing here, dysfunction. So dysfunction just means not oh, by the way, the majority of things that have died from dysfunction, not from cataclysmic events. So slow, subtle changes, bad decisions or no decisions being made, which is usually a bad decision in and of itself. That's what ultimately equals our untimely demise. So it's a really, I think it's an interesting way to enter the subject matter of change management and how it affects. But for whatever reason, we started doing Are People by Nature Resistant to Change? It might have been a time factor because going over this dysfunction section is takes time. And the other thing is that it's pretty heavy. And you figure this is generally happening in the first half hour or so of our experience with an audience. And the question becomes, do you want to get them all bummed out with, less than 30 minutes into a full day training program? And so part of this is really heavy. So depending on who the audience was, we might bring this up, but generally, no, this next section really doesn't get covered. So nothing with a dinosaur. In fact, we would jump from, so that's all there is to it. And we would jump immediately to tension as our next little thing. So what actually prompts humans to change? It's tension. But we skipped over this whole little piece about a different way to look at the natural part of the change process, if you will.
So
Okay,
T, would you say that this is you said there's more meatier things, but I consider this aspect of the training to be kind of the core
yeah,
that to like that, the green circle and operates. And I know it won't have that in this early of the training, but this is like
yeah,
the core moving from that with this understanding of locus of control and
yes,
focusing on
right,
things from that
exactly.
perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, if we were going to do just the basics nature of change, we would have talked about the 4 quadrants. We wouldn't have done that. It takes time to do that. And so back in the day, we would do a basic master stream or a basic ChangeWorks training program. Then there was an advanced program. And so we could go back to the nature of change and plug in a few more advanced concepts into what was going on and that. So, you have to, if you're going to be building a curriculum, just like at a university, you can't talk about year 4 stuff during year 1. So,
Right.
so there, anyway, so dysfunction was a bit heavy. And so it was something we decided to move into the advanced kind of stuff. So what does dysfunction really mean? I'm sure you could look up and find all kinds of definitions, but dysfunction right out of the dictionaries, big definition is not operating at optimum efficiency. That's what it means. So if it doesn't matter how else you want to look at dysfunction, it boils down to this: it's interfering with your optimum performance. It's interfering with you being the best person you could be, the best human you could be. So that's what it is. And whether it's something that's really minor or something that affects every moment of your day, it's still there, and it's contributing to whatever your daily performance is. So if we want to be as efficient as we can be, or if we just want to live the optimum life, be as happy as we could be and content as we could be, then we need to be able to recognize, identify, and deal with the dysfunctions that might be occurring inside of our own lives or inside of a company or inside of whatever, if you wanted to take this out of the oracle, the self sort of
T,
application.
is it fair to say that something happens that creates the opportunity for dysfunction?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, guess what we're about to explore? So, so when we look at the dysfunction and we want to apply to what's happening in life, as we know, we could say that we've got so much dysfunction going on that we've actually been able to identify 3 different groups of dysfunctional people. And so these are the 3 different groups of dysfunctional people. There are addicts, codependents, and adult children of an addicted and codependent family kind of a system. And this goes back to the 1980s, where there were countless books being written on the subject of adult children of alcoholics or whatever. They very quickly realized that anything that could be said about that specific population could be generalized to anyone who grew up in a household where dysfunction was kind of like the order of the day. So there's lots of things you can be addicted to, and there's lots of ways that codependence expresses itself. This adult child phenomenon is something that, at least at the time many books were being written on it. And it would be, some of them would very much focus to what was happening at the individual level. I know Bradshaw wrote several books, but one of them was Healing the Shame That Binds. And he recognized that addiction is actually a disease of shame. That people who feel ashamed of something turn to addictive substances and processes, and that shame perpetuates the use of whatever those escape methodologies happen to be. And so whether the addict is kind of locked onto. And so that was Bradshaw's angle of thing. Well, then you had someone like, oh, what was her name? She wrote so many books on the subject, but she wrote When Society Becomes an Addict. And I think she also wrote The Addictive Organization. So somebody Google that real quick, if you will. Her name will pop up in any moment now. I think it starts with an F. Anywho, the Addictive Organization and When Society Becomes an Addict. And they were talking about, even then again, back in the 1980s, that this incidence of addiction and this drama that includes codependence in adult children was becoming increasingly prevalent. It was having increasingly negative impact on people's lives and family structures and blah, blah, blah. And sooner or later, it was going to overtake companies and it was going to overtake society. So anyone look up who that person was?
And Schwab?
Scheif. Yeah.
Right.
Ann Wilson Schaef. That's it. It's Ann
Yeah.
Wilson Schaef. Yeah. So she wrote a bunch of books on the subject. I'm sure she was very popular on the speaking circuit. If you were looking at audiences among that healthcare profession, mental health care profession, and maybe some of the individuals that were involved, but that was back the heyday. That was serious subject matter for human development professionals back in the day. Well, it may not be something we hear about as often today, but that's it's still got a very powerful lesson to it. So basically, they said that addicts are part of the whole process, the psychodrama of dysfunction and that. So an addict is someone who is a compulsive user of any substance or any process. So don't think for a second that addiction is limited to drugs and alcohol and smoking. You can become addicted to any substance or any process. Personally, I'm addicted to peanut M&Ms. I promise you, if you put a bag in front of me, I don't care what size the bag is, it will be regarded and treated as a single serving as far as I'm concerned. So I will scarf it down. I've got a chocolate problem, but I'm finally able to talk about it, So I think that you guys can certainly look at your own lives, your family members, friends, neighbors, whatever you have. And you don't have to look very far to find someone who is truly addicted to something or another in terms of substances. There can also be people who are addicted to entire ways of living, like people who are, chronic, I don't want to say chronic, chronic exercisers. This is a behavior. The behavior in many ways could be deemed a positive behavior, but any behavior taken to an extreme can become an addiction. And so shopping is a good behavior, but you can become addicted to it. Religion is a good thing, but you can become addicted to it. It's great for people to practice certain spiritual beliefs, but you can get addicted to it. And so there is a level of consumption, if you will, where the substance or the process becomes an addictive issue. So, like food, we all have to have food, but if you get addicted to food, you got a problem. And so substances and processes, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I've seen people that are addicted to ayahuasca because they're chasing enlightenment, and now there's centers that actually treat that. And
They
if you
sure
look at
do.
most
Yeah.
of the chronic diseases,
Yeah.
some of that is the onset of addictions because we train ourselves. Any behavior, you actually train and operationalize the behavior.
That's correct.
But the key becomes from a change management perspective is to, okay, how is this creating value for you? But if you don't have a way of evaluating that, then you just get stuck in the behavior.
Well, exactly. And that's where we, if you really want to do a deep dive into this, we talk about addictive loops and things like that, et cetera. But point is for our little thing here is that there's a certain segment of the society that would be the addict. And some of them are addicted to things like fentanyl and, you know, drugs that could kill them at their next attempt or whatever. But I don't want people to think that the only severe things are problematic addictions. There are lots of substances and there are lots of normal behaviors that taken to an extreme become an addiction. Okay.
Yeah, I was watching this program the other day, and this gentleman who apparently was involved in training both Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and he was doing a comparison between the two, and you reminded me of it in your comments. And he said one difference he noticed between the two of them is that Michael knew when to turn it off, and Kobe did not.
Yep.
And it was a part of the message he was trying to get to Kobe was the importance of letting the body rest. And he was just so committed to training and just constantly trying to perfect his craft, but he apparently was not understanding the need for rest and the value of rest.
Exactly. And it creeps up on you. In fact, that's what Chris's quote is. Chris, go ahead and share your quote. It builds right on what Tim was just sharing. Is this your quote?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, is this a personal quote from you, or is this something that you've stumbled across?
Yeah, due to AARP, it's something in my memory bank from decades ago.
Oh, okay. Because I'll say it's good, man. Go ahead.
The chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to break.
Yeah.
So it's just like with any, like how a lot of addictions start, where it just seems like it's no big problem. Like even when we were talking about drinking earlier, it's just a drink here and here. I just drink socially. And then when that tension comes, it becomes something that you start defaulting to. And then it's hard to even break that habit at that point because it's grown. It's grown.
Yep. And add to it that depending on what the substance was, it could have created physiological changes in addition to psychological changes. And now it's almost like unassisted, the likelihood of you breaking the addiction are really quite remote. So, this is really, so I just want everyone to kind of know the addiction is something that is very prevalent, and we all probably are either addicted to something ourselves, or we're in a relationship with someone who's addicted to something, or we have family members and friends and, neighbors and colleagues and coworkers, etc. Right? So it's there, it's everywhere. Now, addicts do not operate in a vacuum very effectively. So almost always, you're going to find that inside of the world of that addict, there is one, if not several, codependents. So when a codependent is an individual who, by the way, may or may not be addicted themselves, but nevertheless, they're in this relationship with this addict. And in that relationship, they're the ones who are actually allowing it to happen. So they might turn the blind eye, or they might actually assist the person because they don't want them to be feeling as horrible as an addict who isn't getting what they really want might be feeling and behaving, etc. So the codependent, one way or another, is allowing it to happen or enabling it to happen. And they may or may not even be aware of the fact that they are behaving in codependent sorts of ways. So you figure out where the addict is, and I promise you, you're going to find probably several codependents. In fact, addicts tend to hang out with other addicts, and they actually become codependent amongst themselves. So that's why I said a codependent could be addicted to something, but does not necessarily is addicted to something.
We see that's the use of this in technology. Think about the structure and design of social media. Right? How
There's a new addiction.
Yeah, exactly. It creates this virality based on the drama of things, and people, it's too easy to get caught up in that, particularly within these groups, and it creates this tribalism. So this is why millennials, these statistics on them in terms of stress and depression and just mental health, like 40% or more saying they're suffering from it. So
Yep. Well, and certainly Linda and I were noticing how addictive TikTok or short videos on YouTube can be, because they're
Mhm.
so short and they're interesting or whatever. They're good enough for 60 seconds, and it automatically scrolls into the next one, and then the next one. The next one, you go like, have I actually just spent 20 minutes looking at a bunch of inane videos? And the answer is yes. And by the way, they're each one on their own loop. So you might have watched the exact same one over and over and over again. And that's why they get millions upon millions of views doing absolutely inane things. So,
Hey, T.
yep.
That makes me think about the intentionality
Mhm.
of using things like dopamine, right? Because part of the algorithm for TikTok and other social media platforms, like you'll see a video you like, and then that addiction part kicks in because you're continuously looking for something similar, and they know what you like, so they hold it back from you until you scroll X amount of times, and they'll give you another hit of something you like, and then you're back
Mhm.
looking for that same thing. I was reading on this like about a month ago of how that algorithm is, because if they want you to stay on the platform longer, they keep what you're really looking for and interested in from you longer so
That's
that you
right.
can keep scrolling.
Right, because people will actually watch one and go, well, I'll just watch the next one. I'd like to see the follow-up.
Yeah.
A lot of times they say the little video, join me for part two, but part two doesn't follow part one. And so you keep
Right.
scrolling, hoping you're going to get to part two. It's never the
Right.
next video. It's they go, when do you abandon it? How many, after one you actually stopped and watched, how many do you flip through before
Right.
you stop and watch another one? I mean, they know all this about it. So they are not only how do I say, they're the supplier of
Mhm.
the addictive substance, the addictive process, or the
Uh, It's
addictive
designed. It's designed. That's what
it's
Chris is.
designed that way. It's and
They
it does go
hire
back
what
to dopamine.
they call them persuasion engineers is who they hire, but they're
Oh,
behavioral
wow.
scientists, and what they're working with is what's called the action reward ratio. And so just like if
Say that
you think
again,
about,
Brian.
it's called action reward ratio. So if the action and reward ratio is that gap is too long, too high, so they do it just the right, then you're more than likely to jump into that. Now you're starting to train yourself for this dopamine.
Yep. Yep. All right. So,
But they make a big investment. Google spends
oh yeah.
$256 per person on average, and I don't use it. So think of how much they're spending to get you to be addicted. It's a
Well,
lot.
it's exactly right. It's inherent in advertising. What the internet has done is reduce the cost of each incident of a message being sent and received. So they're lowered the per impression, I guess, would be the word. And there's a lot more opportunity, and anybody can do it more easily. So it really is advertising on hypersteroids. But as I think Tim, who was talking about dopamine reward?
Chris,
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was.
Chris. It was all about the dopamine. It's all about the dopamine. That's why the addict does whatever it is they do. And again, codependents enable it to happen, allow it to happen, support this individual because they're not taking care of themselves. The codependent will be taking care of them. So there's a dynamic going on here. You take the codependence away and the addict is isolated on their own. How long do you think that's going to last? So okay.
And the brain scan of somebody that just had a hit of cocaine is very similar to the brain scan of a kid that is addicted to dopamine and scrolling all the time. They're similar. That's scary. That's scary.
Yep, brain chemistry being hijacked. Okay, so the other category is the adult children category. And this is where they were originally focused, saying like, the world's filled with addicts and codependents, and you need to know who they are. But what if you're just this innocent child who grew up watching mom and dad be addict and codependent, never saw what a normal, healthy relationship actually looked like. And as a result, now that you're reaching adulthood, you are duplicating these exact same behaviors, even though you yourself may not be an addict or a codependent. So you're just happen to be a trainee. And if it's happening among multiple important relationships in your life, so you're watching the same thing happen over at aunts and uncles and next door neighbors and whatever's on TV or whatever the case may be, this is all being reinforced. That you've never seen a healthy, normal, well-adjusted individual or interaction at a family setting, and now you're going to do what you can do. The only thing you can do is basically duplicate it until it stops working for you and you decide to look into something. So this was the targeted audience. Well, if you go back to the 1980s, how many people out there do you think would say, oh no, I grew up watching mom and dad, or I grew up watching my brothers and my parents being in this addict codependent kind of drama. And yeah, can't do it. All right, you guys with me on this? Yep. So addicts, codependents, adult child. Well, if you added up all the addicts, all the codependents, all the adult children of alcoholics back in the 1980s, if you added them all up, blended them all together, they represented at that time 96% of the population. So 96% of the population was either addicted to some substance or process, they were in a codependent relationship with an addict, or they were an innocent bystander growing up witnessing this whole thing happen as a primary, what do we say, the primary way you learned about relationships, you learned about how people can operate. All right, so 96%. Now, someone said something earlier that I think it's really, really profound if you allow yourself to just kind of soak in it. And that's that once more than half the population shares any trait, what does that trait become?
Normal.
Normal. It is normal in our society to be dysfunctional. It is normal. And I don't know who this 4% is. I don't know that I've ever met anyone in the 4%. I think they'd be rather kind of bizarre because we wouldn't really recognize them as being normal. We'd view them as being somehow or another not part of the real world or whatever the case may be. So you get that. And who knows, by now, maybe we're up to 100%. I really don't know what's going on. But I think it's very important for us to recognize that dysfunction is not an all or nothing thing. Addiction, codependence, adult children, it's not always at 100% for every one of those every time. We are at a different place along the dysfunction spectrum, each and every one of us. And so rather than trying to look at these generalizations, even as sobering as they are, I think it's really more important for us to say, to what degree has dysfunction entered and impacted my life? And what is it that I can do, need to do, want to do, choose to do to get that dysfunction either out or better managed? And we all know that awareness is the first step on the road to recovery. And so one of the things that we go into next is talking about the progressive symptoms of dysfunction. So if you want to know how dysfunctional you really are, just look at this list. Now, these are the progressive symptoms of dysfunction. They're progressive because they occur in this order, and one naturally leads to the next. So the first thing to know about the dysfunctional system, if you will, instead of thinking it as the addict is one person and the family members are witnessing all this and blah, 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 just think of that as being a system, because that's how it actually operates. Those of you who do systems coaching and that, you know that nothing really happens in isolation. There's a relationship happening in it somewhere. So how do you get into that? There's a system happening. So the very first symptom of dysfunction is denial. So if you heard me say, well, 96% of the population is dysfunctional, and you said, well, I'm not, denial was the first symptom. And so I think that we want to kind of play with that a little bit, because again, you can feel how heavy this section is. Yeah. You guys? Yeah. But you also, hopefully it's interesting. And hopefully you guys see that it has value in you understanding it. So as you go about, relating with other people or trying to understand what's happening in the world around us.
Absolutely.
So denial. Now, the denial leads to confusion. Because while one person is saying, no, there's no problem. I don't have a substance problem. I can walk away from that bowl of M&Ms. While all this denial is happening, someone else who's witnessing it can say, no, that doesn't match. So you're confused. I'm confused. What's going on? I'm witnessing you doing this, this, and this. And you're saying you're not doing this, this, and this. I'm confused. So it's like if you apply this to the corporate sort of world, it's amazing how often we have heard audience members at like a state of the company kind of address or whatever, hear the executives say, we're having the best year ever. Everything's great. We're really good when it comes to DEI. We're really good when it comes to blah, blah, blah. And one employee turns to another sitting in the audience and says, do we work at the same company they work at? That's not what's happening here at all. Right. And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
apply this to the media. How often during a day do you read something or hear something where people are denying that X happened or denying that X is an issue or denying that blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, there's another whole group kind of going like, you're saying what? What are you thinking? Of course there's a problem. What about this? What about this? What about this? And so right here, you end up with a lot of conflict, a lot of fragmentation occurring, a lot of, who was talking about tribalism, polarization, this is it. Because we're confused, we're going like, I cannot spend my time with these nuts. They're denying that there's an issue. We know there's an issue. I can't spend time with them. I'm going to spend my time with people who recognize that X is happening, blah, blah, blah.
So T, I think that for me, I think a lack of awareness happens before denial, because for me, someone would have had to bring it to a level of awareness for that individual to then become or to
Absolutely
be in denial.
I think you're on to something very interesting. Where did the denial come from? How did they decide to deny something? What's their reason for doing that?
But isn't it the denial is what blocks the awareness? I think the denial comes first and it keeps us.
Or how about if I said the awareness came first and it made me so uncomfortable, I had to deny it exists just to protect myself. So do you think it's going back to safe, secure, happy, and healthy, going back to issues of values and feelings of being in or out of control? I think that denial is a very normal strategy for someone to pull into play when they are aware of the fact that they're, I don't know, being scrutinized, they're in trouble, something's happening that's going against their values. Like I always had to laugh that how many families who were good, God-fearing, going to church every single Sunday, talking about how everything is exactly what, and they're the ones that end up with families where there's children out of wedlock and there's all kinds of this issue going on. And initially they want to kind of deny it, or even hiding it is a form of denial. Not talking about it is a form of denial. And we're going to get to that in more detail when we start talking about dishonesty, because if it's happening inside your head, it's denial, up to the point where you actually proclaim the denial. But in that denial, the question is, are you lying? In which case it's a deeper symptom, or are you just not seeing it? Is the awareness not there yet? Yeah. So to Tim's point, I think awareness is involved. Does it come before? Is it simultaneous? Is it the cure? I think there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at that.
Yeah, so about the denial then be like a behavioral expression. So this is where I see the fault of a lot of, and Edie probably can talk more to this, but like a lot of therapy, a lot of times try to change people at the behavior level, without shifting their identity. Identity comes first. And so you're not going to out trick your consciousness. So you can talk about it, talk a good game, but that expression is going to come out based on the behavioral pattern that's the most strongest.
Right. And so, denial. Now, again, everything you guys are referring to, talking about, how professional might interact around it, watch what happens as we go deeper in this, because the question is going to become, what do you consider to be the normal starting point for a client that you consider workable versus how deep down this list do they have to be before you say, this is not a client I want. Not all the business you could have is necessarily worth having. And by the way, if you keep this in the oracle of the self, there's a lot of times you kind of go, do I want this person in my life at all? Do I want to be friends? Do I want to spend time with them? When do I kind of go, the cost of trying to help is greater than the benefit I'm going to receive from it, one way or another, even the investment I'm making.
I'm ready to tap out at level 1 right there.
Yeah,
Because
not a
really,
value match. That's pretty
conversations about like, they say things like, well, the average person suffers from this, the average. I said, look, if we talk about average,
yeah.
that should not be your barometer.
No,
because
of course not.
average right now is suffering from chronic, lifestyle
Well, yeah,
conditions.
average is you're profoundly dysfunctional. That's the statistic. So do you really want to look at that as your benchmark? So, but anyway, again, I just wanted to work our way through this. You guys can see how they travel as a set at a certain point. You can see how far gone is a situation, how far gone is a culture, how far gone is it? So the dysfunctional system lives in a state of denial. That they're fine today, they can deal with it today, everything is just fine, no one needs to be dealing with anything at all. Deny, 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 deny. The denial leads to confusion in those around them, and maybe even confusion in and of the individual. They might be thinking, well, look, how can I be saying in one hand in my head, I'm saying everything is fine, but then this other voice in my head says, oh, no, it's not. So the confusion can exist inside of the individual as well as inside of the individuals with whom they are interacting. Or if we're observing a large system in denial, confusion among the public is something that is how we're noticing it then. So it changes by the level. Get it? So denial leads to confusion. The confusion leads to dishonesty. Now, why does confusion lead to dishonesty? Many of us, most of us, in fact, were probably raised to know a couple of things. Number one, we do not air our dirty laundry in public. The problems of this family stay inside of this household, mister. Yeah, we do not air our dirty laundry in public. So we have actually been trained since childhood that creating and maintaining a facade is actually a good skill to have and not a bad thing to do. Because we're trying to protect others. We're trying to protect our family members who may be going through addiction. We may be trying to affect our family's status in an organization or in a community, because we don't want what's happening, because we don't want to draw a negative light onto us. If you look at some Asian cultures, it's about saving face. Don't bring shame onto those around you. So I'm saying that dishonesty has been institutionalized. So corporations are not going to tell you everything that's wrong and take full responsibility for everything that happened. No, they're going to deny things, and the denial is going to lead to confusion. And they're going to say, look, I know we got a lot of denial and confusion going on inside of our organization, but we are not talking to the press. We are not sharing this with other people. We are not speaking out of turn. We are not whatevering. Get the idea? We're maintaining this facade. You guys with me so far?
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, the dishonesty always leads to self-centeredness. Now, what we mean by this is that if we're at dishonesty, we know right here, we get to this point. We know that people are lying about themselves, right? That they're denying there's a problem. People are all confused about it, including that person. And we're all now lying to one another inside and outside of the organization for fear that we don't expose this dysfunction. The dysfunctional system's greatest fear is being exposed, being found out. And so it'll do just about anything. Well, if we're witnessing all this happen, we know there's nobody we can trust anymore. Everyone's confused, everyone's denying. So I better make sure that one person's butt is very well protected. And whose butt's that going to be? It's going to
My
be
own.
It's going to be my own. And so, yeah, I got to go ahead and be dishonest. I'm confused. I see them denying all of this is already happening inside of my world. But I've decided the best thing for me to do is to just continue with the myth going on out there. I'm just going to take care of me. So I'm going to fly under the radar. I'm going to put on the happy face, anything I can and need to do in order for me to be okay. You guys, so far, so good. Got to make sure one person's protected. Trust is damaged. It might even be gone. So, because I'm around the wrong people, how did I get sucked into this? A lot of self-centeredness. Now, that self-centeredness, because the person often who gets self-centered just says, I'm just going to settle into this. I'm just going to play my role in this psychodrama because it's the safest thing for me to do. That leads to moral and ethical deterioration, because we have now basically allowed dishonesty to exist and perpetuate with full knowledge that we're actually lying. We're saying, like, I'm going to do that because it's protecting me, or I'm not going to lie, but I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to call anybody out on whatever's going on. And so that leads to moral and ethical deterioration, whereas where we very much get into what Chris chatted over about it not being a value match. We're going to say, like, I don't really care that it matches my values or doesn't match my values. It can go ahead and do what it does. So how it happens to other people, I don't mind lying. I don't mind cheating. I don't mind stealing. All these things are okay because I got to take care of me. And the reason I got to take care of me is that I can't trust anybody and they're all a bunch of idiots and they're denying what's going on. Have you guys ever heard or thought of this backwards progression, justifying moral and ethical deterioration or explaining logically how it came to be?
Oh, yeah.
It all came to be that. And unfortunately, moral and ethical deterioration leads to death in the event of an actual physical addiction to some sort of substance or whatever. Well, maybe it is a physical death, but more than anything, what has died is the sense of family and community and trust and a lot of shared values. And these are the things that are dying right and left all day, every day. And it's simply the very predictable outcome of a logical progression of symptoms that have gone on there. Now, I said to you earlier, if you were working with someone or wanting to be friends with someone or whatever, where are you okay? Where do you cut the line? Would you say, well, everybody's in denial about something, so I'll make room for that? And even though I know that there's some denial going on and it doesn't really match, in my intellect, I say, well, that's not right. That's confusing or whatever. Am I even calling them out on the confusion? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And maybe I'm willing to pretend like everybody else that nothing is really wrong with them. And so I might not be outwardly lying, but I'm also not outwardly telling the truth. And so I'm incongruent one way or another. Is that okay? So am I okay being around people that are in denial and confused and dishonest and participating in this drama? Are those okay? What about self-centeredness? Is that something I understand people may be because they've grown up? Is this okay? So am I okay working with people and living with people that are in the first four? But what about if they get into moral and ethical deterioration where they no longer or care so much about themselves that they no longer care about how it's impacting others, how it's compromising things we hold near and dear? Is that where we draw the line? Or we just made it now so possible for everybody to live in this progressive set of symptoms that we expect that they are going to die or something is going to die, some belief, value, system, whatever. It's all just going to fall apart and life as we know it will come to an end. So do you see why I don't like to do this program in the first half hour with an audience?
Yeah, that's quite heavy because I've been
It is
around so
heavy.
much geopolitical nonsense all of my life that I have a hard time even
Yeah.
I have a hard time, number one, with myself. So you can imagine how I feel when I see it in other people and the drama that comes from it within organizations or industries like
Yeah.
healthcare. I don't know how to play that game well. So I become
Well,
very
and it's interesting because then you would try to align yourself with organizations that you believe are driven by moral and ethics, and this is all that. But what we know for certain, if you guys can come up with an exception, I'm happy to hear it. But I believe that every organization has its set of skeletons in the closets, and it's got its own share of things that have happened that it doesn't want the world to know. And so I believe that even the most moral and most ethical organizations out there are definitely still have this happening at some level to some degree in some areas of whatever the world happens to be. Am I too cynical, or you guys think I'm right?
No, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. There's a difference to me in conversation between moral, ethical, and a value driven. Because a lot of times they say values.
Oh, no, no, I gotta say this, Brian. There are plenty of people out there right now who are proclaiming certain values who are not living those values.
Absolutely. That's what I said. So they're saying
Yeah.
values, but there's a difference between that and value.
Well, and if we go back to the denial and perhaps what's at the basis of addiction is shame, it may very well be that what one of these earliest experiences was that someone had was that they were never given the message. You know, as you guys have gone through pride-based leadership, you've heard me say that all adults are grown-up children. And from the earliest ages of a child, the child needs to hear three messages delivered well, not continuously, but delivered frequently, but delivered, routinely to them. And that is that you are loved, you are safe, I'm proud of you. If we did not grow up in an area where we felt safe, if we didn't grow up in an area where we felt loved, and if we grew up in an area where instead of being uplifted, we were being denigrated, instead of being noticed, we were being ignored, we ended up feeling ashamed of who we are, that we weren't deserving of certain things. So I think that this goes all the way back to those fundamentals we talk about in pride-based leadership or a variation pride-based parenting. This begins when children are babies.
Yeah.
And it all continues on. So, I mean, how old does a kid have to be before they become very good at dishonesty? Right. How old does a kid need to be before we start hearing them deny things?
Not very.
Not very, I'm not a parent, so I really am asking you guys. Like,
It is true. It's not very old. Did you do
No,
that?
it's
No,
like
I
2
didn't
and
do that.
3. We know a little girl who it was before she was 3 years old, she was dishonest and manipulative.
Pathological liar.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so this is the time we go like, as professionals or as just people living society, I would say to you that if I've got a potential client and they're in some denial, I'll go, yes, well, welcome. They're confused. Yes, I can help you sort out what you're confused about. Being dishonest, we can look into why and help you to live a congruent, authentic sort of life with yourself, etc. But you can't be dishonest with me, right? This is where we start saying, I don't know that I want someone in my client base, invite them into my reality that is this deep into it. So denial, confusion, that's my client. I'm here. And I get it. I understand that you've been dishonest or you're trying to protect yourself and others. I get that. So I'm not judging you for being dishonest to others. We'll work on that. But if you're going to be dishonest to me, I can't help you. Right? And so I draw the line there. I also know, and those of you who said, no, even though they're being dishonest, I'm still going to work with them. I promise you, you are putting yourself in line to ultimately be thrown under the bus. Because sooner or later, you are going to be asked by that leadership, what's going on with so-and-so. And so-and-so is going to be very self-centered, and human beings do not take responsibility if they can conveniently blame. And so the blame game is going to be as their way of protecting, again, the dysfunctional system's greatest fear is being exposed. And so if anyone gets too close to the truth about another person, we become dangerous. We represent a potential loss of control for them. And so the best thing for them to do is to get rid of us. And so moral and ethical deterioration. Yes. Thoughts?
Also with dishonesty, that's where the Dunning-Kruger comes into play there. right? The overestimation of one's abilities or the underestimation of what really a task has.
Right.
So dishonest, you're being, that's also being dishonest to yourself of appropriately
Well, it's a little
diagnosing
bit,
the
and it's
situation.
also a little bit confused because during,
Right.
wait, why do I say Dunning-Kruger? Yes, Dunning-Kruger, is that the person misrepresents themselves. So not only might they think that they are more capable and things are less challenging, they would obviously then misrepresent it to others. But I also wonder how often they knew that they were misrepresenting. No, they knew the truth of a challenge and ability, but chose to misrepresent it anyway. So that's where we get into dishonesty and that's so. But I'm happy. I'll do this. You just can't lie to me, because I am not willing to be set up for failure in my working with any client. And if you're not going to be honest with me, I can't help you. And you're sure as heck not going to be blaming me for you. So that's what happens if we get down here: the death of an opportunity, the death of a client relationship, all because we allowed ourselves to remain in this progressive dysfunctional psychodrama and forgot where this drama ends. We need to know this is the last act of the play. And if we're still on stage when this last act occurs, what do you think is going to happen to us before the curtain falls? We're going to be dead.
Nothing good.
Nothing good, nothing good. So these are the progressive symptoms of dysfunction. I think it's important for you guys to understand these well enough to be able to evaluate that. Now, one of the other, I know we're over time, but let me finish this. I only need 2 more slides. But this is why when we're trying to work with an organization, we can decide whether we want to do it or not. But you guys can also do this in terms of friendship. The reason why I didn't want to do this with my audiences was because I knew that if it was a corporate audience, who do you think they would be focusing on as they're processing these progressive symptoms?
The leader.
The leadership team, their manager. And that's where we get into what we talked about last time around, a cascade credibility collapse, because everyone's lying to everybody up and down the organization. We got to make sure that one person's butt's very well protected. That's going to be me. I'm going to survive whatever their chaos is up there, blah, blah, blah. If we bring this up too early in a training program, we may very well hear from whoever hired us halfway through that this took a turn they weren't expecting, and so they want to cancel the rest of the day. That's never happened to me because I understand these symptoms, So to finish this off on dysfunction, it's a sobering thought that our society really is destined for extinction. And I think that we're seeing enough evidence in the way that humans are interacting with one another all over the planet today. Even if you go back and you want to look at we're at war. Where did the war come from? Who's addicted to power and who's codependent allowing it to happen, and who's just growing up witnessing this horrible psychodrama play itself out between these two. So when I say this, it's not a joke. I do believe that on the course we are on right now, that in all likelihood, humans might not become truly extinct, but I think that you go a billion years down the road and maybe someone finds our planet and they find their own little unique slice of the fossil record, and in it is all of us. And so we got to think about this. If we don't want this to be our destiny, then we have to recognize that it is important that we can understand where we are on this spectrum of dysfunction. By the way, it's situation specific. So in certain areas of your life, you may have no evidence of dysfunction whatsoever. In other areas, you may have some. And if there are multiple areas, where are you along this progression? It's not always going to be the same. Nevertheless, if we were doing work in family dynamics, family therapy, we would want to see if we could say, where is the family as a whole? How far gone have they gotten? Why do you think a lot of families are all the way down to moral and ethical deterioration? What do you mean we're calling each other names? That's unethical. That's not a moral thing to do. We're yelling at people. We're doing blah. We actually get into fights and ... Well, your family's over. And so, yeah.
So may I ask real quickly, how did you scan for that? You said, how did you scan for those on that the dysfunction system.
Oh my goodness. I believe that this is a drama that we are all watching all day, every day, all around us unfold. We're just watching the movie. So that's what it is. We say, the first way to deal with this is to separate yourself from it. That's why we talk about why it's so important to live in and stay in your green circle. Because the moment you step outside of that green circle, you are inside of this world. And so to whatever degree you can, become an observer of this happening in others rather than a participant in the drama itself. And that's it. If you want to stay in the dysfunctional system, what do you think the likelihood is that sooner or later you're going to get sucked into the dysfunctional psychodrama?
Yeah,
Yeah.
take over the lens at which you look at things.
Yep. And so I guess what I'm saying is that this is something that came from observation. It came from, I'm not a psychologist by training. I certainly am not a substance abuse counselor by any kind of training. I personally, I count my blessings, have never personally had to deal with personal addiction, although I have brothers who have, and my father was an alcoholic and all this. So I've been surrounded by it, but by the grace of whatever you'd like to empower, I have not personally had that happen other than M&Ms. So, I'm not going to say I'm immune to it, but nevertheless, I haven't had to deal with the kinds of things that so many people we know are dealing with in very dramatic ways, day in and day out, in the relationships that they have with themselves or with others around them. So it's a big, big, big deal. Is that fair enough to say? And
Absolutely.
certainly for some families, far bigger deal than others. Or maybe we even start applying it to patterns inside of cultures or whatever that gave rise to a whole other set of issues in the way society operates, because there's a higher level of frequency of some of this. Among the addicted, there's always going to be a higher level of addiction among those close to the addict. So why should that surprise anybody? So it's the way that it is. All right. So I think the last thing I put up here is, why is understanding this important? And it all goes back to, it ends up becoming the most important survival skill we have. Because if I go back to the beginning, the things that will wipe us out are cataclysmic events. By the way, none of us, even to this day, can predict the sorts of cataclysmic events that may very well take our life. It is because of our inability to identify or manage these cataclysmic events that the insurance industry was born. So because we can't control a cataclysm impacting us, maybe we can spread the risk across a larger population and then minimize the impact that cataclysmic event might have on our own life. Obviously, if it's life insurance that we're talking about here, because it's life specific, there are things that we can do to mitigate the impact of a cataclysmic event. So, but bottom line, there's very little we can do to stop this from happening. We need to put all of our attention instead into understanding dysfunction, the way that it's happening inside of us and those we care the most about. And then ultimately, for so many of us, it's our business. How do we factor this into, life with our clients? And then ultimately, for those of you in the Oracle of the Self, how does this play out in your own life and in the life that you're living on planet Earth? Yeah. So that's why I always ended this by saying as a joke. So if any of you up to now have labeled me as a motivational speaker, I hope this has fixed that. So,
Hey, Chief, question.
I am not a motivational speaker.
A quick question. On the slide that showed, I think the third leg was adult child. Yeah, that one.
Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking about the psychoanalytic theory on transactional analysis.
Yes, exactly.
Really with that adult-child communication. And maybe next time around, we can take a look at that.
Yeah, you look at the different roles in transactional analysis. And didn't we do one that was a triangle, that there was always going to be a perpetrator, a victim, and then a hero? So perpetrator, victim, hero. If anything, the burden is placed on the adult child who's witnessing all this to be the one who steps up and tries to become a normal person, even though they've never seen what one looks like. They go on a personal quest, a developmental plan to help them overcome this, and then maybe they can step up and be the hero in this. I think a lot of times people who were an addict but recovered, I guess you're always an addict, but nevertheless, they are in recovery and have been for a while, they will also turn to a hero role. In fact, I forget the statistic that says what percentage of substance abuse counselors were substance abusers at one point in time, but I think it's a pretty powerful, majority of those that get involved with it. Yep. Because they want to minister to the population that is really being vilified, if you will, or whatever the case may be. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So with that, we're going to go on to the next little step. We're going to pass by this little side trip and get back into the next main topic in the world of the nature of change. And I've already told you guys that's where we start talking about tension. So final comments, thoughts about today? Were there any ahas that happened?
Thanks for the motivation.
I got to tell you, for my entire career, if anyone ever described me as or introduced me as a motivational speaker, I would visibly shudder in response to it, because I always felt like I'm not here to motivate you. I'm here to provide you with insights, tools, and techniques. And if those insights, tools, and techniques motivate you, then I want you to take 100% ownership of that success that you've had. I didn't motivate you. You motivated yourself based on what you're hearing. And why I do that is because I don't want people to become addicted to external infusions of motivational messages.
Right.
That's in and of itself a form of addiction. And we might say it's a positive kind of thing. Well, I can certainly think of people who became addicted to personal growth. Now, technically, they got addicted to buying all the materials from all the personal growth gurus, but ultimately did none of those programs and made no changes.
Right. That's what Harvard called a smart talk trap, where people talk about things and the talking itself, they conflate with action.
With action, with application. Yeah.
Right.
No, it's a real thing. So I just said, no, I'm a trainer. I'm very comfortable with my role in this whole world. I'm a trainer. What people do with the information that I give them is up to them. And if it's motivated, that's their fault. So it's not.
That's good.
Yeah, I would. And Linda's on the call. She can tell you, don't ever describe me as a motivational speaker.
And people, when you say the word speaker, they go, oh, motivational speaker.
Yeah, they assume that everyone who speaks for a living is a motivational speaker. And that just talks about how limited their experiences are. But I would always just say to them that this is what I am. I'm a trainer. And I'm here today to give you as much knowledge, insights, tools, techniques as I possibly can, in the hope that from this you will take from it at least something that you can immediately apply with success in your life. And if I've done that, then you've motivated me to do this again.
Well, it was good. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad you like it. Yeah. Okay. Not fishing for quarters. I've been doing this for a long time. All righty. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Brian, what are you going to be doing?
Yeah,
absolutely nothing here.
So they don't even do anything. I got to believe they have a harvest festival at some point of the year.
No, I think they do something different. Yeah. So
all right. Well,
if I were there, I would be maybe come visit and taste some of Miss Linda's pies.
There you go. That's vegan. You can have that. But yeah, I don't think you're going to find a vegan turkey in Nicaragua.
No.
Well, they must have 3 growing seasons a year, right?
Well, that's true. Even continuous growth seasons. Yeah.
Hey, T, how about a retreat next year?
I'm open to doing a retreat if you guys feel so inclined. Just kind of know that Arizona at its best is probably going to be in like May is too late. March or April, I think we could get away with it. And whether I would have it locally here or say, maybe we should just find a fun, large Airbnb or something up in Sedona. We could have some classwork during the day and then go looking around, maybe go on a meditation hike. We've got plenty of friends who can get us like someone to do some yoga or some touring, because Sedona, you guys know, has got all these, what do they call those points? Vortexes. There's all these magnetic vortexes in Sedona.
I don't
And
believe
supposedly
it.
if you sit on top of one, you get a little thrill.
That's
I
not,
sat on it.
that's not true.
No,
We've
I've never-
done that, yeah,
I've never sat on one.
all we wanted to do was maybe have a beer.
Yeah, I kind of think like anytime you go to any of those sorts of places, it's a bring your own joy kind of
Yeah, exactly.
thing, right?
The sights are beautiful, they're
Oh,
breathtaking.
They
breathtaking.
really are. I mean, I
And it's
love.
fun to sit in a vortex. I mean, it's fun to say you did it and get a picture of yourself in, lotus pose.
Yeah. Now, if we
Um,
did Sedona or something like that, we would probably want to do the retreat during the week, which I know can be inconvenient, but the place just gets inundated with tourists on the weekends.
Yes.
The time of year. So we just have to be thoughtful around that. There's lots of other fun things that we could do as well, but Sedona, if people have not been to it, I think is a must see for someone new.
And you have to invite Miss Diane too.
Oh yeah. Look, Diane will do things on a whim, and so
Exactly,
I
exactly.
promise you, she'd show up as long as she's home from her cruises. Okay, all right. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining. So have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I'll talk to you.
Thank
You
you.
too, thank you.
All right,
Bye.
bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Take care, Linda.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.